to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, March 28th, 2016, almost up here on April. And we have got lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Daniel is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, as you're probably already hearing, if you're looking at the establishment media, there was a shooting incident today in Washington, D.C., in the Visitor Center, which is this underground facility they have near the White House and the Capitol building, and they called for an immediate lockdown. The lockdown has now been lifted. A suspect is in custody. They're saying a police officer was shot and wounded slightly, and the police are saying there's no danger to the general public. So it's starting to shape up like maybe this was a personal grievance between two individuals. But the corporate media is still on it. This is the hot story here. Meanwhile, there's been a bombing over in Lahore, and basically there's this supposed Taliban faction group. So I thought the Taliban was only in Afghanistan. They're claiming that they're deliberately targeting Christians. And it looks like somebody really wants to start a war between Christians and Muslims. I wonder who would want to do that. But over at Henry Makoff, they have a different point of view, saying that all these recent so-called suicide bombings are really remote detonations. I mean, if you really think about it, why would somebody commit suicide with a suicide bomb? Because he who bombs and runs away lives to bomb another day. And today, delayed timers or remote control are very, very easy to do. And in the past, when there were suicide bombings, you know, they would display the bodily parts, like the head and stuff. And according to this article, the reports from the witnesses are saying that, no, these are actually bombs that are placed. There's no suicide involved with them. And certainly that was true looking at the damage at Brussels for the metro station and the airport. The damage seemed far greater than can be accomplished with some kind of wearable explosive. But then we live in an age of lies. It's being constantly poured on us, trying to trick us into more war, less freedom, more of our money, more of the lives of our children. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. Now, meanwhile, over the weekend, Saturday, there were 3 Democratic caucuses in Hawaii, Washington State, and Alaska. Bernie Sanders swept all 3 by huge margins. Alaska, Bernie Sanders had 81.6% to Hillary's 18.4%. Washington State, Sanders had 72.7% to Hillary's 27.1%. Here in Hawaii, Sanders got 69.8% to Hillary's 30%. Now, Bernie Sanders is sweeping state after state after state, and it's getting harder and harder to presume Hillary is going to be the nominee or declare that Bernie is already finished. His campaign is re-energized, not only with the victories, but the scale of the victories. Now, one thing I noticed when I was watching the returns come in from Saturday was that we got the results from Alaska and Washington State almost immediately, and Hawaii. I went to bed at night with it still saying results will be posted soon. Something weird was going on. And there's an interesting article over at Oraz.com about other people noticing that there was something funny going on with the Hawaii returns, and so they went out on social media and said, how did you vote? And got a feel for what was really going on by the voters. And that's a really good idea. That's a good cross-check on the election for everybody to get on social media and say, I voted this way, how did you vote? And just get a feel for what's really going on the ground in this age of epidemic, rampant election fraud. And by the way, yes, it did happen here in Hawaii. A story coming out of Investment Watch blog and a couple of other sources. They literally caught a Hillary supporter who was an elections volunteer stealing Bernie Sanders ballots and trying to throw them in the trash can. And she was caught at it. They got her on video. They got her removed from the process. And Hillary still lost by a 2-to-1 margin. Now, I spoke with a friend who was forced to wait 1.5 hours to vote for Sanders. And what comes out of all of this, of course, Hillary's supporters are coming across as real scumbags. And that's going to backflash on her because people are going to be less willing to say, I'm a Hillary supporter, because they're going to be confused with these other people who are stealing votes and trying to rig it and steal the election, because that is not America. I'm beginning to smell panic in the Hillary camp. Now, up in Alaska, Democratic voters were forced to caucus in the Alaska parking lot because of a record-setting turnout. The elections up in Alaska were not prepared for how many people came out to vote. And obviously, if you look at the numbers, they were coming out to vote in favor of Bernie Sanders. Or let's be more accurate, they're voting against Hillary Clinton. They're fed up with having Hillary Clinton shoved down their throats and up their nostrils. Now, over at the Trump Ballot Security Project, this is a website called StopTheSteal.org. And they are acting as independent outside monitors for election fraud across the country. They're already reporting 600 reports coming in just from Texas on all the fraud that was taking place there. Remember, we were reporting on people were calling into the radio stations and saying they were trying to vote for Donald Trump, and the machines kept switching their vote to Marco Rubio. And so the Trump Ballot Security Project has a toll-free number. They're already getting reports from Ohio and, again, here in Hawaii. There's 300 complaints from Oklahoma. It's thoroughly out of control. Now, Bernie Sanders is getting ready to go up against Hillary Clinton in her home state. And if he wins there, that's going to be significant. That's like when Marco Rubio lost in his home state down there in Florida and began to signal the end. If it weren't for those superdelegates who are already firmly in Hillary's camp, this would be a real race. Now, getting on over to Ted Cruz, as you know, there's this huge sex scandal. And Ted Cruz is out there saying, I'm only going to say this once, and I want to be very clear, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, or that woman, or that woman, or that woman, or that woman. And sometime over the weekend, somebody faked a cover from the National Enquirer, trying to steer the story and say it was even bigger. And so somebody is out there trying to plant poisoning the well type graphics to try and wreck the credibility of the story. But Roger Stone has come on out and said, look, if we're wrong, sue us. Ted Cruz is a lawyer. He could sue the National Enquirer. He could sue Roger Stone. He could sue anybody talking about this scandal. He's not going to do it because that would allow the presentation of the evidence of what Cruz has been doing to be presented in open court, and it would then be a public record. And so all of Ted Cruz's denials, he's not backing them up. All he's saying, oh, it never happened. It's all Trump's trying to wreck me and all the rest of that. Now, do you remember Deborah Jean Palfrey, the D.C. madam? And we had her on our show. She was on a lot of radio shows about her records for her escort service. And Deborah Jean Palfrey stated on my show and every other show that she was on, if she turned up dead, it was not suicide. So, of course, she turned up dead. The establishment media said it was a suicide. Stop thinking too much and, go back to work. Now, for some reason, the courts have ordered all of the D.C. madam's records sealed. You're not allowed to see them, and we know why. There are some very big business and political names in there. But Deborah Jean Palfrey's lawyer is now out there filing a motion with the court saying that Deborah Jean Palfrey's records of her escort service are relevant to the current presidential election and should be released. They won't be, but it's still interesting to consider. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back to the political campaign, a little update on the story of the shooting in Washington, D.C. They're saying that the shooter managed to get into the visitor center with a gun coming in from the Senate side. Now, for those of you who have not been there, the visitor center was set up so that people could visit the Capitol building but not actually interact with the members of the Congress. If you think about one of those little plastic tube hamster things, that's kind of the way it's set up. There's a barrier between the members of Congress and the members of the public so that members of Congress won't savage the tourists over the cash they smell in their wallets. And to get into the tourist side of this, you have to go through metal detectors, of course. So now they're saying that somehow this guy evaded all that security, and everybody's all upset because of what happened in Brussels here. So they're really pushing this thing. Let's grab a phone call here from Andrew in New York. Aloha, Andrew. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I want to talk about the attacks in Belgium. And it's 100% sure that these attacks were just like yet another false flag.
That's the safe assumption. Everybody's saying exactly the same thing. Nobody not on a government paycheck is buying the official story on this.
Yeah, one thing I'm not hearing from the corporate media is like the two supposed suicide bombers, which I don't believe. They had like criminal records. Like one of them was sentenced for 9 years in prison in 2010 for firing at police with an AK-47 assault rifle during the
They had a long criminal record. They were violent. They were known to Brussels. And maybe instead of watching the law-abiding American citizens, they should have been paying attention to these people with known violent tendencies and criminal records. I mean, either this was a false flag and these guys were chosen to be the patsies, or the entire global surveillance, law enforcement, anti-terror operation is a complete, utter waste of time and money. Take your pick.
And what's worse is, like, the corporate media is saying there's going to be more ISIS attacks.
Oh, yeah, they're wagging it real hard. Rita Katz is all over her Twitter account and everything saying, ISIS coming to get you. ISIS going to get you if you don't get back on board with the war agenda. We got to go conquer all these countries where ISIS is. They're really pushing this thing. And, yes, I think there are going to be more terror attacks, and I think there are going to be more false flags. I think they're all going to be false flags. Okay?
Yeah. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, bye-bye. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to the campaign. Interesting little article coming out of no less than the New York Times. Ted Cruz names his friends, but silence from GOP brass deafens. And what they're talking about is that Ted Cruz is picking up a few more endorsements here and there. But the GOP leadership and top GOP donors seem to be slowing down on him. Now, Ted Cruz has been running his campaign as the last line of defense against a Trump nomination. But we all know about his citizenship problem. I mean, 2 years ago, when Ted Cruz started talking about running for the White House, Fox News acknowledged, because Ted Cruz is born in Canada, he is constitutionally ineligible to run for the president. Something that I'm sure Hillary's campaign will not hesitate to bring up should Cruz be the nominee. But as we see the GOP leadership forcing more and more toward a brokered convention in order to block Donald Trump, I think it's becoming very obvious Ted Cruz is not going to be their anointed darling, especially after this sex scandal. Now, Ted Cruz lies so much, he needs a nose job every second Thursday. PolitiFact actually did a story about 90 random Ted Cruz assertions, and only 6% were factually true. Now, yesterday, Cruz was on Fox News and was caught in several more lies. One of them was that Ted Cruz immediately denounced the nude photo of Melania Trump that was put out by a pro-Cruz super PAC. And in point of fact, no record of any such denunciation can be found anywhere. He's just making this stuff up. Okay, we are seeing an article over in Politico. Insiders to Trump, no majority, no nomination. What they're saying is that if Trump does not achieve the 1,237 delegates to achieve a first ballot victory, that the GOP leadership are simply not going to allow him to become the nominee. So we need to get Trump his 1,237 delegates, which we can do by keeping Ted Cruz's sex scandal in front of all the voters, and that remind them that just because a corrupt elections commission has declared Cruz eligible to be president doesn't mean we, the people, have to go along with it like a bunch of sheep. Now, this has become the election year where the American people finally face up to just how crooked and rigged our elections really are. And this is a fight by the American people to take back control of the elections process so that we choose our own leaders. Now, you remember all this talk about Rule 40 where a candidate had to have won in 8 states to be considered a nominee. This rule was passed back in 2012, and it was passed specifically to block Ron Paul and his delegates from getting to the floor. Now today, of course, Rule 40, subsection B, it stands in the way of anybody else being put forward as a nominee in front of Donald Trump, who has won most of the states so far. And now the Republican National Committee is out there saying, well, Rule 40, that was only for 2012. That was only to block Ron Paul. And it doesn't apply now. We can pick a nominee who hasn't won in any states at all, like, well, you know, Mitt Romney or something. They're just changing the rules to cheat the American people of their right to pick their own leaders. It's time to warm up the tar and start plucking those chickens, people. Now, Donald Trump is out there making a cogent comment. Saudi Arabia would not exist without U.S. protection. And he's absolutely right. That was the heart of the petrodollar deal. That if Saudi Arabia and the other Middle Eastern oil nations would sell their oil only for the U.S. dollar, the U.S. would guarantee their safety from Israel, which the U.S. is not actually able to do anymore, which is why they're starting to sell their oil for other currencies. But Donald Trump is out there saying, why are the American taxpayers being bled for all this military protection of other countries? If these other countries need protecting, let them pay for it. Let them pay for these weapons. Let them pay for our troops on the ground. Let them pay for the radar coverage. And that makes absolute perfect sense. Of course, from our policymakers in Washington, D.C., if they start charging for all this defensive protection, these countries are going to say, well, you know something, we've thought about it really good and hard, and we actually don't need you in our country protecting our interests or protecting your interests. You just go on home. And that's the end of U.S. hegemony. Meanwhile, as part of the Easter celebration down in Mexico, Donald Trump was being burned in effigy by all these Mexicans who think they have a divine right to come to the United States of America without going through the legal immigration process. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we are seeing the marshaling of these forces against Donald Trump, and I think setting a new low point here is Rick Perry was on Fox News Sunday morning features, and basically came out and said that if there is a contested convention or a brokered convention, real Republicans will support Senator Ted Cruz. So, you hear that? The GOP leadership doesn't think you are a real Republican unless you support the candidate they want, even though that candidate is, as Fox News itself admitted, constitutionally ineligible to be president. And what they're basically saying is they're not going to listen to you. They're only going to listen to Republicans who agree with them who the candidate should be. Does that sound like democracy in action to you? It doesn't to me. Somebody apparently put up a symbolic tombstone for Donald Trump in Central Park. That's getting very serious. And apparently the GOP establishment's Rick Wilson is out there saying that the donor class must put a bullet in Donald Trump. I hope he gets a visit from the Secret Service. There are way too many people out there talking about killing Donald Trump. All right, we're going to take a quick phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Hey, Mike, I just remembered you speak of Rick Perry. I think everybody needs to go on YouTube and watch Wailing Wall Wrecking Ball and watch Rick Perry marching around that table with the hands in the Jewish lobbyists there.
Yeah, probably. But, I mean, you know, Perry's already out. I think a lot of these former candidates have dreams of somehow taking a brokered convention. And I'll bet you that as we get closer to a brokered convention, you're going to see a lot of these people like Rubio and Perry break ranks and say, yeah, Ted Cruz is ineligible. And it's for certain. Go ahead.
The problem is, Mike, the Clintons, the Bushes, these people live within a wall. You know, like, I just...
Let's cement over the doors.
I wish we could. You know, the system is just so broken.
Oh, it is.
People live in another world. And it's sad to see the American people just falling over for Hillary Clinton and these.
I don't know how real that is. I don't know how real that is. I mean, we have an article further in where people are noticing Facebook is always saying Hillary Clinton is trending, but there's never anything there. It's always about Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. A lot more posts and everything. Around here in Hawaii, like I said, Bernie Sanders had supporters on all the street corners with the banners and everything. I didn't see a single Hillary poster. I've met very few Hillary supporters. One of them was actually a nun who punched me when she saw my Hillary for Prison T-shirt. But I don't think Hillary's got that support. I think it's part of the illusion, along with the massive election fraud that we're seeing.
Did you see that focus group on Hillary? I mean, pretty much you can see it in Hillary's eyes. They even said she's a liar. You know, why would you vote for a liar? You know, I mean, that's the non-common sense. These people are liars. They're oligarchs. They're never going to do anything for you. They're only going to do...
Look at all of Hillary's political baggage. Travel office firings, cattle futures trades, the murder of Vince Foster, Whitewater, Castle Grande, Flowerwood, and on and on and on. And her attempt at Hillary Care, which was an absolute disaster. How can you look at that track record and think anybody is going to support her? The only people really fanatically supporting her are these militant feminists who want a woman president no matter what. Hillary could be Countess Erzsébet Bathory, and these militant feminists would still want to put her into office just to show those men who's boss.
I think you missed Benghazi, arming terrorist rebels to overthrow Assad.
I only have 3 hours to do the show.
Hey, Mike, I want to give a shout-out to the Russians and the Syrian Arab Army, and good job, well done in taking Palmyra.
Yeah.
Next stop is Raqqa, and Raqqa needs to be, I hate to say this, but tactical nuke, because that's where we're all going to. That's the last stop is Raqqa.
It's all but over, and it's kind of, you can see the steam coming out of Obama's ears and David Cameron's ears, and they got defeated. This is a defeat for Western hegemony over Syria, and they're very, very angry, and they're trying to figure out some way that they can justify going back in there, which is why we have to be on the lookout for a major false flag attack to be blamed on Syria. They've already blamed Brussels on Syria. They've already blamed, those terrorists, they got their instructions from Bashar al-Assad. And it's more of the same lies. Saddam's nukes, Assad's sarin gas, now Assad's behind the Brussels bombing attacks. I mean, all these people know how to do is lie. And when nobody believes them anymore, they're stuck. They don't know what else to do. And I'm afraid that...
It's the same playbook, Mike. It's the same playbook of their Hitler, their mass murderers, and look.
That all worked. Justin, let me finish this thought. That all worked back in the 1930s, ignoring the fact that Germany ultimately lost. But it doesn't work today in the age of the Internet and an independent media and people who are skeptical, who've already lost all trust and faith in their entire government. It's not going to work. They're going to lead this nation to a disaster if they follow this war agenda any further.
That's where these people's Achilles heel is. They're still living in the past, and they don't understand that people are waking up.
I agree, absolutely.
Heel, Mike.
All right, well, listen.
Donald Trump. Okay, I just want to say Donald Trump needs to be real careful at this point on.
I'm sure he is being very, very careful, and I'm sure he understands that there are a lot of very powerful, capable people who would like to see him dead. My other concern, getting on back to the situation with Syria, we're burned out on bombings of airports and train stations. Planes into skyscrapers are passé. And so I'm expecting that the next false flag attack is going to be really big, either multiple attacks in multiple cities in multiple countries, or they're going to go ahead and set off some kind of a nuclear bomb because they're wagging that nuclear aspect out of Brussels, how they were going to break into the nuclear power station and use the material to build a nuclear bomb. Well, for anybody who understands nuclear physics, you will need to understand that the material that you find in a nuclear power station cannot be made into a bomb absent all kinds of wide-scale refining, enriching equipment. It just is not possible. Now, getting on back to the campaign. Paul Craig Roberts is out there saying that Trump also says we've got to reinvestigate 9/11. This will drive the neocons wild. And you have to ask yourself, if the 9/11 story from the government was absolutely true, why would anybody in the government care if it's being reinvestigated? The fact that they're fighting any kind of reinvestigation or reexamination tells you right there, there's a cover-up. Now, Donald Trump is very upset because apparently over in Louisiana, he basically won the state and somehow got less delegates than Ted Cruz. How could that happen? So Donald Trump is planning a lawsuit. There's another head-scratcher. Up in Washington State, Sanders beat Hillary 72.7% to 27.1%. Washington State has 101 delegates, but only 25 have been given to Sanders. And it turns out that all of these rules by these party leadership are being rewritten to say, well, in this case, we're going to hold these delegates in reserve, and they're not pledged to the candidate who won the state. We're going to allow them to. And they're just changing the rules as they go along. And they're going to shove their preferred candidates down our throats and up our nostrils and tell us, look, this was all by the rules that we just made up. You can't complain. These are the rules. Don't you want to play by our rules? No, actually, we don't. Not anymore. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And now they're reporting, and this is relative to the shooting incident at the Visitor Center in Washington, D.C. Apparently, the shooter was known to authorities and apparently was involved in another incident last fall. And they can't. They're so busy watching the law-abiding American citizens, they can't keep track of the known problems, can they? Now, getting on back to the campaign. Little bit of good news coming out of the Trump family. Yesterday, Easter Sunday, Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka, had a brand new baby boy named Theodore James Kushner. And congratulations to the Trump family. I'm a sucker for small children. What can I tell you? Okay, now then, Bernie Sanders has come out on the attack against Hillary Clinton, talking about her latest fundraising dinner that cost $353,000 a ticket to be able to sit with the former First Lady in all of her magnificent corruption. This was all being hosted by George Clooney and his wife, and apparently they are the subject of much ridicule and abuse within Hollywood for doing so. And it's no secret that George Clooney harbors political ambitions. He figures if Schwarzenegger and Reagan can do it, that he can do it. So we'll see what's going on here. Now then, the probe into Hillary Clinton's email server enters a new phase. The FBI is starting to schedule interviews with Hillary's aides. They are indicating that Hillary herself will be interviewed. They haven't set a date for that. And they're making a big deal about how they've got 147 agents on this case. And you and I would all like to see Hillary finally pay the consequences for her actions. But I still have my doubts. And I still think that between now and the general election, they're going to come on out and say, well, look, we had 147 FBI agents looking into this email scandal, and there's a lot of questionable stuff, but we couldn't find a shred of evidence that she actually did anything wrong. Now, we already know that's false because of that email that was released in which Hillary is instructing a subordinate to strip the classification headings from a document and send it non-secure. That's a felony violation of Title 18 right there. Now, Roger Stone is out there saying that Obama is going to pardon Hillary. Now, normally you would think that one would have to be convicted before they can be pardoned. But, as it turns out, there have been cases where presidents have issued pardons to people for all crimes past and future in order to prevent the case from going to court and exposing some really nasty secrets. Gerald Ford did that with Richard Nixon. Caspar Weinberger received such a pardon. These are done to shut down the investigation before the really nasty dirt, like a serving Secretary of State selling secrets to foreign governments, comes to light and delegitimizes the entire government. Now, if Obama were to do that, if Obama were to just issue a blanket pardon for Hillary to shut down all the investigations, how do you think the voters are going to react to that? Hillary supporters are going to say, see, it's a vindication, it's a vindication. No, it isn't. Why is she being pardoned if she hasn't done anything wrong? Wouldn't she rather have her day in court and exoneration? Remember, politics isn't a court of law. Politics is perception. And if Obama pardons Hillary, the perception is going to be some crime somewhere, sometime was committed, and there is a cover-up in place. And that's not going to sit well with the voters after all these years of corruption and cover-up here. Now, Judicial Watch is going on the warpath because it appears that back during the investigation into Whitewater, that there was, in fact, a draft indictment of Hillary Clinton. It was never filed, but it's still there. And Judicial Watch wants a copy of it, and it's being blocked by the Obama administration. The National Archives are claiming that releasing this draft indictment is a violation of Hillary Clinton's privacy. Well, no, it isn't, because indictments are public records. And Judicial Watch is going to fight on this one. And basically, Judicial Watch is saying that Hillary Clinton's behavior in this indictment is germane to the current election and her desire to be President of the United States of America. So, alrighty, over in The Guardian, there was an article, and I labeled it as a mega puke factor 9.999 Bex alert. And we're seeing a lot of these come out, that Hillary Clinton is fundamentally honest. And yes, she likes her privacy, but don't confuse that for anything nefarious. Hillary Clinton is fundamentally honest. And I was going to go on in and ream the author of this piece a new one, but several hundred other commenters beat me to it, and The Guardian shut down comments before I could get in there. But we're going to see all these establishment media puff pieces coming us. No, really, Hillary is honest. Absolutely. We know she lied about the email server. We know she lied about there being classified information on the server. And it is almost frightening that Hillary's supporters know exactly what Hillary Clinton is, and they don't care. They just want a woman president. And yes, the author of this op-ed in The Guardian is a woman. We have to have a woman president. And I get all this hate email all the time. You just hate Hillary Clinton because you don't want a woman president. I don't have a problem with a woman president. I have a problem with this particular woman being president. I still think Linda Lingle, our former governor here in Hawaii, would make a great president. I think Sarah Palin was a political joke. Let's not pick our leaders on the basis of skin color and gender. Let's look at what their actual performance record is. And anybody who looks honestly at the history of the Clintons, that's what you judge Hillary on. Now, there's an article over in TargetLiberty.com where there's rumblings of the attempt to put together a very quick third party to go into November to try and take votes away from Donald Trump should he succeed in gaining the GOP nomination. And they're proposing as a candidate retired Marine General James Mattis. And they're promoting him as the one man on the planet who can save the U.S. Obviously pro-war, war hawk. And they make a big deal out of the fact that he looks a little bit like George C. Scott in the movie Patton, which to me is a really stupid reason to vote for president. He looks like a celebrity. All right, let's talk about the economy right now. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank there's a line out the door. More than 30 countries are trying to join, in addition to its 57 founding members. This is turning out to be one of the biggest foreign policy successes of China. And more countries, including major U.S. allies, are joining because they can see the writing on the wall. The Federal Reserve-centered global economy is coming apart at the seams. Article over in Zero Hedge, why America may not be considered a first world country much longer. Well, gee, walk down the main street of your local town. Look at the cracks in the pavement, the leaking water mains, the toxic water coming out of the faucets in your home. We're not a first world country. We're not the greatest nation on earth. We're in rapid decay and decline. And the U.S. is trying to reverse that by simply blowing up the rest of the world so the rest of the world is worse off than we are. That's not how you advance human civilization. How you advance human civilization is you make the planet better, not just blow up the people you can't compete with anymore. 23% of Americans in their prime working years are now unemployed. This is from government slaves. We know that the official unemployment number is a joke. It's manufactured out of thin air. It consists only of people who only recently lost their jobs. People who have been unable to find work for years are shuffled off into another category that you're not supposed to look at. But it's somewhere between 30 and 40% of Americans who are willing and able to work have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. Meanwhile, of course, illegal immigrants and refugees are pouring into our country, and they're not going to find any jobs either. They're just not there. Another little story here. Why corporate profits will plummet. The managerial... Actually, I'm going to hold this till after the news break because it ties in with some stuff that's coming up later on. So we're going to take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Before we get back to our news and the phone calls, I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the Ted Cruz sex scandal, because Ted Cruz is out there blasting Donald Trump. How dare you do this? It's all your fault. You're friends with the people at the National Enquirer, blah, blah, blah. As it turns out, this all came from Marco Rubio's campaign. They were attempting to get this story somehow into the media weeks ago when Rubio was still running. And it just took this long to percolate through their various cutouts until finally the Enquirer ran with it. Now, Breitbart is saying they had the same story. We're hearing all kinds of confirmations from other inside sources. As Roger Stone says, if this story was false, why isn't Cruz suing the Enquirer and everybody who's talking about it? Now, 2 of the 5 women involved have already issued denials. The other 3 are just saying no comment at this point. But this did not come from Donald Trump's camp. This came from Marco Rubio. All right, let's go ahead and grab a quick phone call from John in Barbados. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yeah, sort of shocked about the news that General Mattis might be a third-party candidate. This is the same general who was in charge when the 26 Pakistanis were bombed over the border because General Mattis didn't know where the border was. My Australian friend offered to send him a $200 GPS machine to show him where the border was. But anyway, that's another story. Yes, another major, shall we say, screw-up by the U.S. in Iraq. They've bombed another military base of the Iraqi army and killed, 26 or 30 people and injured loads more. I'm surprised the Iraqis aren't turning the heavy weapons, tanks and artillery on American bases.
Well, the last time they tried that, they lost, and so I'm sure there's a certain amount of caution there in Baghdad. But Baghdad has made it very, very clear they don't welcome the U.S. presence in their country. The frontline commanders are saying that every time they're going after ISIS, the U.S. forces seem to get in the way rather than actually helping out, and this airstrike is another one. And I know that what we're going to be getting from the State Department is, oh, gee, we're sorry, we don't know why this keeps happening. Really, we're in Iraq to bomb ISIS, and I don't know why we keep bombing the Iraqi army. I guess all you Middle Easterners look the same to us, but really we have good intentions, so stop complaining.
Well, I think that sort of argument will be slightly amiss because now the Iraqis have full control over the airports where they have to ship these extra soldiers in, and they have plenty of equipment now, and they are becoming quite a potent fighting force, even despite the American efforts to curtail their advances.
Yeah, this plan to carve a new Kurdistan out of Syria, Turkey, and Iraq is in serious, serious trouble. Syria is all but gone, and I'm sure the U.S. is already planning some kind of a gargantuan false flag attack to get us all angry enough to send our kids into Syria, and I don't think it's going to work.
Neither do I. I think people are now questioning various things, even John Kerry's latest remarks.
Yes, I was noticing that. All right, well, listen, John, I got a lot of stuff I got to cover today, so we're going to let you go here. Thank you very much. Getting on back to the economy. Interesting article in of2minds.com. Another reason corporate profits will plummet, the managerial professional class is burning out. And basically they're going on saying that these corporate CEOs who are engaging in questionable practices can't do it all on their own. They have to have underlings who are willing to go along with it, and that's a high-stress situation because we've already seen many, many times where every time one of these frauds gets discovered, it's the underling that is offered up as the sacrificial lamb to go to jail. And because of this, overall, all over Wall Street, all over corporate America, you're seeing the CPAs and the mid-level managers, they're burning out and they're just saying, I'm out of here. Now, hold that thought because we're going to come back to that in a little tiny bit. Now, according to the Congressional Budget Office, this year, millions more Americans will lose their employer health coverage due to Obamacare premium spikes. They're saying as many as 9 million working Americans are going to lose their employer-based insurance coverage. And what's going to happen at those employers, in order to exempt themselves from the health care coverage requirement, they're going to move their employees to part-time, or they're just going to be firing people to get below that ceiling. Obamacare is an absolute unmitigated disaster. And it's time to simply stand up and say, yes, it's a disaster. It was badly thought. Its real goal was to make the health insurance companies richer, and it isn't working. Year-to-date corporate default jumps to the highest since 2009, and they're talking about how over this last holiday weekend, when we're all looking for our chocolate eggs and everything, CEOs of 5 corporations, mostly energy, announced they're filing for bankruptcy. Now, here's a very interesting story. And they're still using the word reputable. They're saying this highly reputable executive with just as reputable private equity firm was arrested and charged with securities fraud. This is Andrew Kasperson. He's 39 years old, a Harvard Law School graduate, partner of the Park Hill Group, which is an advisory firm that up until last fall had been part of the Blackstone Group and was recently spun off as Paul J. Taubman's PJT Partners. This gentleman, Andrew Kasperson, has been accused of defrauding institutional investors out of $95 million through fake private equity investments. According to the SEC, Kasperson invented fake financiers, set up false email addresses and misleading domain names, all in an attempt to embezzle $100 million in investor funds. So why are they still using the name reputable? And this brings me to The Big Short. Now, last week we were talking about Consumed, which is a very good film on the subject of GMO and its problems. And yes, we're going to be talking later on in the show about how the Tribeca Film Festival pulled Vaxxed about vaccines and all the intense financial, economic, political pressure that was brought to bear on that one. But now we're talking about The Big Short. It's out there on cable, and it's based on a book, which is in turn based on a true story of insiders during that whole mortgage-backed security fraud meltdown. And Claire and I caught this one on pay-per-view. And the film it's funny, it's entertaining, and that's a good thing. I mean, the film actually starts out asking, how do you make the intentionally obfuscated and boring, pardon me just a second. The film starts out asking, how do you make the intentionally obfuscated and boring world of finance interesting and entertaining? And then they proceed to do that. It's a fast-paced, well-edited romp through the story. It's punctuated by comments to the camera. It's got cameos in there, including Anthony Bourdain, who uses a fish stew to illustrate how mortgage-backed securities were converted into collateralized debt obligations that were utterly worthless. And it's an amazing story to watch. I think it conveys the degree of corruption on Wall Street even more compellingly than Inside Job. And the end result of watching this movie is the realization that there are not just a few bad apples on Wall Street. The entire system is one gigantic fraud from top to bottom, reaping billions for the players and dumping the losses on the American people. You have to see this one. You have to see this one. I'm going to the Blu-ray. This goes in my permanent library. And it is an entertaining film, and they really do illustrate. These people were lying to each other. And they're talking about how when the default rates were going up on the mortgage bundles and the ratings agencies insisted they were AAA and they challenged the Moody's ratings people, and the Moody's people are saying, well, we've got our bosses, and they're telling us to keep these ratings up. You got to watch this one. The Big Short. It's on cable now. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Joseph in Oklahoma. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I would like to add, there's another good documentary, and it's on YouTube, and it was from the BBC, but it was called The Super Rich and the Greed Game, and it's a good illustration of how the rating agencies and the banks were able to slide talk their way out of it, because when they rated them AAA and then they sold them off, since AAA in the past never defaulted, since they were basically like government bonds, they were able to say, well, we didn't know they were. But in the emails, they knew exactly what they were selling. And not only that, the mortgages that they betted against, because see, they put those credit default swaps against them. The credit default swaps more than paid off the loan that was taken out for the property or whatever the case may be.
Well, that was originally the purpose of the credit default swap, was to reduce your risk. But there are no.
You see what I'm saying, though?
Yeah, no. There are.
Like they were able to get the money way more than what the property is worth, and not only that, take the property from the original person who took the loan out.
Yeah, that's the problem with the credit default swaps. Okay, credit default swaps are like an insurance policy you buy an investment. With regular insurance, okay, you have to own the asset being insured. I can buy a fire insurance policy on my home. I cannot buy a fire insurance policy on your home. But with the credit default swaps, you can buy these credit default swaps against anybody's debt, and you can buy as much as you want. And that's what really led to this out-of-control meltdown. And The Big Short really does tell the story of how it was built up. And, the fact that it comes from this book. And by the way, The Big Short was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. It won the Academy Award for Best Adaptation of a Screenplay from a Book. So the Academy is saying the film follows the book very closely, and the book relates true stories. Now, they've changed some of the character names for artistic license, but the real people who were involved in this thing are all known and identified. We link to their website. And I just found the Super Rich, the documentary you just mentioned, and I just posted it to the front page of What Really Happened. Okay?
Yeah, it's a really good documentary, and it makes you sick to your stomach, because it talks about the haves and the have-mores, and it's really, really just like stomach turning when you look at it and when you really start thinking about it, and you think about how much people work just to make ends meet, and it really makes you mad because they were able to. It's like legal fraud. Because that's
exactly what it is. So, in the United States of America, bankers are not arrested for fraud. Their corporations will pay a small token fine that represents a tiny fraction of what their fraud gained them, and then they just go back and they do it again. Now, you contrast that with Iceland, which is throwing their crooked bankers in jail, or Iran, which is hanging their crooked bankers. Now, there's an idea whose time has come.
Okay, Mike. Well, that's all I wanted to let y'all know.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, very alarming article coming out of the Daily Bell. Politicians push for war as the way out of economic troubles. I have been telling you this for months. Every time the U.S. government and the money junkies get the economy into an absolute state of collapse, they get into a world war to try and fix it, or at least distract you from it. Oh, yes, times are hard, but it's all the fault of the war. It's not the fault of the bankers, looting the place. And this article goes on to all these statements being made about how desirable war is, how war could fix the economy. And they come on out and say, World War III is going to be a catastrophe, and it will not produce the economic benefits that we were all told World War II provided. Now, the only benefit World War II provided was to establish the Bretton Woods Agreement that forced the rest of the world to use the U.S. dollar. And part of the post-war years boom was from all this wealth coming in, this mafia-like piece of the action of global commerce pouring into our financial system, along with the fact that the United States was the only country whose industrial base hadn't been bombed into rubble. There was no way to lose during those years. And apparently, they're referring to this, Japan's finance minister came out with a statement recently saying that the current economic trends have only one possible outcome. There will be a war. Now, speaking of war, and as we mentioned before, the Syrian army has completed the liberation of Palmyra from the ISIS terrorists. They're in full control of the city to the point where they're playing soccer in the streets. Now, the good news is that they have done a quick survey of all those UNESCO World Heritage sites that ISIS was trying to dynamite because Israel can't stand other countries to have archaeological remains of their ancient past, because it underscores the fact that nobody can find any archaeological remains that support Israel's ancient stories. And they've discovered that the damage is not as bad as was thought. It's about 20% damage to the ruins, and they're saying within 5 years they're going to be able to repair and restore these archaeological sites. Now, Russia Today had a very telling article. Palmyra liberated, the United States and Great Britain very angry. And they are. This was a huge defeat. For 5 years, the U.S. government has been trying to get Bashar al-Assad out of Syria and put in a U.S. puppet regime, and they have failed. Now, Russia is sending robots and engineers to Syria to help demine Palmyra, because ISIS left a little going-away present in the streets, and they need to clean the place up before people are allowed to live normal lives there. Story coming out of pilotonline.com. The tangle in Syria deepens. We have factions fighting each other, both of which are supplied by the United States. State Department on one side, CIA on the other, your tax dollars at work. Doesn't matter who wins or loses, you pay for it all. Does that sound like wise and prudent government? Wise and prudent government wouldn't have gotten into this mess in the first place. Okay, now, possibly because of the U.S. airstrike that killed 30 Iraqi soldiers, Iraq's Mukhtar al-Sadr is extending a sit-in protest in Baghdad, basically demanding reforms to fight corruption, which is a very polite way of saying they want the U.S. puppet rulers out of their country. And I think that's an idea whose time has come. How many more times are we going to have to go back into Iraq? They don't want to be a province of the American empire. Deal with it. Russia is starting to make nice noises with Turkey, saying that they're going to take a Turkish resort off the air flight ban list, and Erdogan will welcome this because Turkey's tourism has taken a major hit in all the regional conflicts. We'll be right back with a phone call after these few words. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show here, and the We Hate Donald Trump Network, formerly Fox News, is out there. They're really hitting this idea that there are 147 FBI agents investigating Hillary Clinton's email server. They keep hitting that number like we're supposed to be impressed what a serious effort they're putting in there. You know, it's like a little kid who squints their eyes and holds their breath and says, I'm really trying. I'm not hopeful the FBI is actually going to do their job. Because remember, the FBI have been the Clintons' protectors going all the way back to the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. And Hillary can blackmail them with that. They're stuck. They have to go on protecting Hillary Clinton, or she's going to reveal to the world some of the nasty stuff the FBI's really been doing. And it doesn't look anything at all like what you see in movies and TVs. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. Wes in Idaho, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. First, I want to say I'm honored by caller Joe from California who said, hey, that Wes from Idaho seems knowledgeable, and was referring to the White Horse prophecy. I really don't know that much about the White Horse prophecy. However, I guess it was made in 1843 by founder of the Mormon Church, Joseph Smith. And I guess three of the things he prophesied seems to have come true. One is that the Mormons would move
Well,
to the
hang on a minute. Okay, because there are so many people out there making prophecies. And no matter what happens, somebody somewhere had a lucky guess. Nostradamus. I'm getting a lot of emails from the Nostradamus people saying that Erdogan is the Sultan with the blue turban who will start World War III. And so I really don't want to get into, mythologies here, but I do thank you for the phone call. Okay, so we're going to let you go. Now, back here in the real world. NATO Commander General Philip Breedlove is calling for the United States to bring back the U-2 spy planes to Europe to conduct increased surveillance of the Russian military, insisting NATO needs more intelligence collection against Russia to counter the Russian aggression. General Breedlove, last I heard, Russia can shoot those U-2s down. You might want to talk to a guy named Francis Gary Powers about that one. Don't you have satellites? If you're going to bring back a plane, bring back the SR-71. That's a sexy bird. All righty, now then, this story is so bizarre, there's going to be a palm to forehead moment, so grab a handkerchief or a washcloth and put it up there to prevent bruises. The Western political establishment is starting to talk about a plan to restore the monarchy in Libya. And they've already got a king they want to put in, Mohammed el-Senussi. Now remember back when they were going into Libya and bombing it for the first time, they were going to kill Gaddafi because we have to bring democracy to Libya. And now, of course, we find out that from internal communications from Hillary's email server, Libya was destroyed to prevent the rise of the gold dinar, and it being a threat to the U.S. paper dollar. And as far as democracy is concerned, nothing is as undemocratic as a lifetime monarch. This is like when the U.S. imposed the Shah of Iran back in 1953. They're going to do it all over again to those Libyan people. You have a king now. Bow down and worship. China has issued an order to all of their military to end all paid outside work. The way China runs their army, it's more like the National Guard here in the United States of America, where the soldiers have regular day jobs and then so many weekends and weeks they go on training. China is now saying they're converting all of their soldiers to full-time paid positions in the world's largest standing army, and they want to make sure they're more professional and more battle-ready. China knows what's coming. A war by the Federal Reserve note on the yuan. Now, last week we were talking about this video that was captured by a human rights worker of an Israeli soldier just executing a wounded Palestinian, lying on the ground, absolutely on his back. His head was moving a little bit. He was already wounded. And this IDF soldier just walks up and shoots the guy in the head. And the Israeli people are rallying around this guy. Yes, he's a hero. The only good Palestinian's a dead Palestinian. And they're out there. They think this guy's a hero. And here's where it gets really into the twilight zone. Benjamin Netanyahu is out there saying that criticisms of the IDF are outrageous. And he goes on to say how the soldiers of the IDF, our children, maintain high ethical values while courageously fighting against the bloodthirsty murderers, blah, blah, blah. He's out there saying that Israel's army is the most moral in the world. Well, let's be honest what's going on here. Israel has come into Palestine and stolen it for themselves. And any time the Palestinians complain, they're declared terrorists and gunned down in cold blood. That doesn't sound very moral to me at all. And here's a bizarre story. This actually happened last January, but it's worth mentioning. Anne Frank's father, remember Diary of Anne Frank? Anne Frank's out there tweeting on Twitter, "Who's reading my diary?" Signed, Pissed in Austria. Anne Frank's father has been promoted to co-author And this came about because of an attempt to keep the work under copyright. Under Dutch law, where the diary originated, it's due to be made public domain, but the trust that owns the book wants to go on getting residuals and royalties. And so what they've done now is said that Anne Frank's father, whom they previously admitted edited the work, actually had a lot more creative input. And therefore he is now promoted to author, and they can have a new copyright based on Otto Frank being the author that will extend them several years into the future. Now, there have always been reasons to doubt the authorship of the Diary of Anne Frank. Some of the writing is clearly far too mature for a young girl of Anne Frank's age. Second, much of what is presented to the world as the original manuscript is written in ballpoint pen, and ballpoint pens were not available in Europe until after the war was over. Third, there was a lawsuit filed by a New York scriptwriter, Mayer Levin, who claimed that Otto Frank copied some of Mayer's work into the diary, and the court found in favor of the plaintiff and ordered Otto Frank to pay Mayer $50,000 for the illegal use of his work. One thing should be clear. The story you were told in school about how the diary was the sole work of Anne Frank herself is a complete and total fiction. How much more are you going to have to be lied to before you realize that we live underneath a government, educational system, and politicians and corporations who lie to us about everything? Absolutely everything. And again, go back and look at The Big Short. They were lying to each other as long as they got that commission. Now, apparently yesterday on Easter, Obama announced he's bringing another 100,000 Muslim refugees to the United States of America. This is following up on an absurd statement. Pardon me. Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson came out with a statement saying that the illegal aliens are not going away and are, in effect, already U.S. citizens. And the D.C. elites are wondering why Donald Trump is winning the Republican primary with a promise to control our borders. Now, the INS is trumpeting a successful sweep of nearly 1,000 suspected multinational, transnational gang members in the United States of America. They arrested leaders of MS-13, Sorinos, Nortenos, 18th Street, Bloods. How about we close the borders so these gang members don't get in here in the first place? That seems to me like a better solution. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. So, as you remember from before the commercial break, we have another 100,000 Muslims pouring into the country, courtesy of Barack Obama. We have illegal immigrants pouring over the borders, including gang members committing crimes, smuggling drugs, all of that. We have the head of the Department of Homeland Security basically declaring by imperial edict that the illegal immigrants are, in effect, legal American citizens. Now, hold that in your brain while I tell you the story of a gentleman named Yulian Stoyanov. He's from Bulgaria, and he is a world-class violinist. He is a graduate of the College of Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati. He's a former adjunct faculty member. He teaches music, and he is about to be deported with his family. Now, he came to the U.S. on student visas, and he's been applying to the Immigration Naturalization Service for permanent residency. And he tried to apply underneath a program of foreign nationals with special abilities. Unfortunately, to the INS, foreign nationals with special ability are limited to patent holders, because that means money's coming on in. Nobel Prize winners, so we can brag about them. And Olympic medalists, so we can brag about them. And there is no room in the INS for gifted cultural artists. And so they're going to send this guy and his family back to Bulgaria. At the same time, we have illegal immigrants with no qualifications for work in this country pouring in, bringing along a bunch of infectious diseases. By the way, scarlet fever is on the rise again in Europe. Where are the priorities here? The whole point of an immigration law is so that we bring to this country people who bring gifts, who enrich our society in some way. If you go to the article, I linked to it, They've got a video. The guy plays brilliantly, and he teaches. And the government's going to kick him out. At the same time, the illegal immigrants are all blessed as de facto U.S. citizens. Maybe this guy ought to just go down to Mexico and walk across the border into Texas. They'll let him stay then. This is absurd. This is a tragedy, is what this is. In this day and age of electronic machines and MIDI and everything, real musicians who can still play the classical instruments, they're in short supply. The other day, Claire and I went on down to our local musician supply store, and it's all these little DJ things with the phony record player pads that you scrub to take somebody else's music and distort it. A lot of electric guitars, I will grant you that. I didn't see a single violin in the place. Now, of course, I wasn't looking for one. But isn't this somebody who would be a benefit to our country? It's amazing. Over the commercial break, I was looking at the We Hate Donald Trump network, and they had a banner story about how John Kasich is calling for Donald Trump and Ted Cruz to consolidate behind him. Now, Kasich, of course, is in last place. A lot of people were wondering why he has not already dropped out. And then we find out, courtesy of this article over in fellowshipoftheminds.com, that George Soros gave John Kasich $700,000 to stay in the race. And the reason there is obvious. If Kasich drops out, his supporters are likely to go over to Trump rather than Cruz. And Soros is out there to buy himself a brokered contested convention so that the candidate of the money junkies is presented to you as the people's choice. And by the way, George Soros has made himself the biggest single argument for socialism in the United States of America by illustrating that people with way too much money can cause a huge amount of mischief. Now, meanwhile, members of Congress are starting to ask questions about why the Veterans Administration has stripped 260,000 veterans of their Second Amendment rights. I'm not sure it was legal for them to do that, because the Second Amendment doesn't post any qualifiers. But I know why the government is doing it. In the event of an armed rebellion, those veterans represent an already trained military force. So, of course, the government is going to disarm all of them, saying, they're all crazy, they're all suffering PTSD. Well, yeah, they are, because you, the government, put them in those situations. So you send them into war, you dope up their mind on all the antidepressants, they come back damaged, and you say, well, we got to take the guns away from them. Is not a serving soldier of the U.S. military equally entitled to the protections of the Second Amendment? Somebody needs to take this one to court. Sometimes you have to wonder what side the government is actually on. And there's a story that came out of Oraz.com, and it's about this story where this homeowner found an intruder breaking into his daughter's bedroom, and the homeowner beat up the intruder, who later died of his injuries. And police are charging the homeowner with murder of the intruder that he caught in his daughter's bedroom. Whose side is the government on? It almost seems like our government is so criminal that they're siding with the criminals, doesn't it? I mean, after all, they don't want you to have assault-style weapons, but boy, they're sure pouring military weapons all over known terrorist groups in Syria. They're sending assault military weapons, heavy weapons, down to the drug criminals in Mexico. But you can't have them. No, 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 no. Anyway, now, let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. Over in Kansas City, they had an Easter snowfall. I'm dreaming of a white Easter. Late winter storm slated to hit Utah. And they're looking at 2 feet of new snow in the northern mountains. Actually, it's not a late winter storm. It's an early spring snowstorm. We're in springtime. Snow over in Denver Metro, still snowing in southern parts of the state. Conifer 12 inches, Monument 7 inches, Ken Carl 6 inches, Erie 5 inches. Storm hits mountains, mostly misses Durango. Another storm coming to the San Juans tonight. And of course, the ski resorts are absolutely ecstatic. They're able to keep their ski season open much later than normal. And they're already out there saying, yes, we still have snow. It's high quality snow. You can ski in Schuss and Stem Christie and all this other good stuff. Look at the ski bunnies. Snow flurries could be coming to Windsor, Canada for the weekend. And I got an email from a listener. It snowed in Tokyo. I'm beginning to think that Al Gore and his supporters may have been fibbing about this human-caused global warming nonsense. Remember back in 2000 when they were running the banner headline, "Snowfalls are now a thing of the past." Wrong. And here's where it gets really colorful. Now, you probably remember Rajendra Pachauri. He used to be the head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was the United Nations agency pushing this whole global warming, therefore we have to have a global climate tax and a global environmental authority. And because of various corruption allegations, Pachauri had to step down. He had been running a group called TERI, an energy research institute that he founded. And he's had to quit that job because he's now been hit with a sexual harassment case that appears to have some serious legs. But Pachauri is out there. He knows what's going on. The sexual harassment case is all the work of those evil climate deniers. Those climate deniers. By the way, in this story, they identify Pachauri as a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He is not. The Peace Prize was awarded to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as a whole, shared with Al Gore, not to Pachauri personally. But he likes to claim otherwise, that he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. No, you're not. Sorry, but you're not. Alrighty, we're coming up here on our last news and commercial break. When we come on back, we're going to be talking about science and health issues. We're going to be talking about the documentary Vaxxers. Was supposed to be debuted at the Tribeca Film Festival. And all of a sudden, at the last second, it got yanked. Another display of how people with too much money are up to no good. So we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Was listening to that story about the volcano up in Alaska. And here in Hawaii, we're always very nervous about anything seismic in Alaska because we get the tsunamis down here. There's also another major eruption taking place in Mexico. The planet seems to be rocking and rolling. We're having an increase in earthquakes down here in Hawaii. We had one up on Maui, and that is very, very unusual. It was a magnitude 3.6. We had a magnitude 4.5 on the Big Island about a week ago, and for Hawaii, that's a large quake. You know, we had a magnitude 6 some years ago, but most of our quakes are small. Interestingly enough, however, there is a sudden surge in the quakes along what's called the southern rift zone of the Big Island. And I'm looking at the map right now, and we've had something like 5 just in the last 2 hours. So the Earth is kind of rocking and rolling, and we're just going to keep looking at that here. Alrighty, getting on to science and health news. The U.S. is asking Novartis AG for records of about 80,000 events that the U.S. is declaring to be sham. They were supposed to be conferences and teaching sessions, and basically the government is saying Novartis just were whining and dining the doctors to get them to prescribe the company's cardiovascular drugs to their patients. And yes, that goes on a lot. Now, the Swiss drug maker and the Manhattan U.S. attorney are engaged in a whistleblower lawsuit alleges Novartis provided illegal kickbacks to health care providers through bogus educational programs at high-end restaurants and sport bars where the drugs were barely discussed at all. Basically, the meetings were, here's a bunch of money, push our products. And the healthcare manager said, absolutely, that's what we will do. So, this gets us on to the documentary film Vaxxed. Now, Robert De Niro, you know him, very famous, very capable actor. He has himself a child that has autism, and De Niro has been very concerned about evidence that seems to link childhood vaccinations with autism. And there's been a big fight between researchers and corporate power trying to keep a lid on this. And so Robert De Niro, who co-founded the Tribeca Film Festival in New York, was going to show this film there, and he was going to personally introduce the film to the audience. He thinks the film is important because it does make the case for a connection between vaccines and autism. Then there was this huge uproar, and all of a sudden, Robert De Niro cancels the screening. Now, the producers, director of Vax are, needless to say, very upset. They're wondering what is going on. And there's already an interview with the filmmakers linked to WhatReallyHappened.com. It was a total surprise to them. So now we're seeing this story that comes out of Natural News saying that the pressure to kill this documentary came from the Sloan Foundation, which is currently headed by Council on Foreign Relations member Paul Joskow. And the Sloan Foundation is apparently heavily invested in pharmaceuticals. Now, the Sloan Foundation is named for Alfred P. Sloan, who was a Nazi collaborator and eugenics depopulation promoter. And his beliefs about using vaccines to bring about population control dovetail very closely with those of Bill Gates, who was advocating massive global depopulation through the use of vaccines. So, going on back, a little flashback. 7 years ago, Japan stopped using the MMR vaccine. It's the only developed nation to ban it. And basically, Japanese government health officials claim a 4-year experiment with it has had serious financial and human costs. And apparently of the 3,900 medical compensation claims relating to all vaccines in the last 30 years, 1/4 of them came from the MMR vaccine. Now, the triple jab was banned in Japan in 1993 after 1.8 million children had been given 2 types of MMR and a record number developed non-viral meningitis and other adverse reactions. Now, if you find it hard to believe that the government would allow medical corporations to sell you toxic, dangerous, possibly ineffective medications, talk to all those people who have toxic water pouring out of the faucets of their homes right now and ask them if this is an idea that should be dismissed out of hand. Another story coming out of Natural News on July 29th of last year, U.S. Congressman Bill Posey got up on the floor of the House and he basically laid bare the CDC's deceptions. Oh, my goodness, there's a big bug in this room. Just 2 seconds. It's got to stop. Boy, he's faster than I am. That's a big bug with a big stinger. All right, I'll get him later. Anyway, basically saying that the CDC destroyed vaccine documents. And a lot of this goes back to the whistleblower, William Thompson, who was one of the authors of the 2004 study that CDC claimed showed there was no link between autism and vaccines. And Thompson came forward to say the entire study was a sham. They cherry-picked the data. They destroyed data that indicated a link with autism. This is how they're operating. Now, right now, the U.S. government has paid out $3 billion to vaccine-injured families. And there are 2 things wrong with this. Every time the government makes a payment, it's stipulated that this is not an admission the vaccines are dangerous. And, of course, the taxpayers, rather than the vaccine manufacturers, are picking up the tab. It's disgusting. Now, we did a flashback story, again from Natural News, saying that cancer industry profits are being locked in because of the Negalase molecule that's injected into humans via vaccines. Now, Negalase is a protein put out by cancer cells that blocks the body's attempts to kill the cancer cells. Why are they being pumped into healthy people in vaccines? Nobody seems to have a convincing explanation other than it destroys the body's ability to fight cancer by itself. Right now, if you're healthy and you haven't been contaminated, 25% of all cancers will spontaneously go away. The attitude of the cancer industry is we don't know which 25% that's going to be, so we treat all the cases aggressively. And a lot of these doctors who were looking at this nagalase molecule or the GC-MAF, which promises an actual cure for cancer, have been meeting very strange deaths lately. It's almost like our entire government is just an organized crime outfit. And it's all about taking more money away from you, waging wars. It's corrupt from top to bottom, which isn't that hard to believe, again, if you go back and you look at The Big Short, which illustrates that the entire Wall Street system is one big crime organization. No matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up. But you look at the toxic tap water, the decay in our infrastructure, it does seem as if our entire nation is in the grip of a giant political machine whose only ambition is to just suck all the wealth out of the nation, out of its people, put it in their own pocket. They don't seem to have any other concerns whatsoever. Think about that. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back into the health story, we're getting an update from Washington, D.C. Apparently, there was some kind of a drill going on at the visitor center. And apparently the suspect, Larry Russell Dawson, was shot at by officers when they thought he pulled a gun. But at this point they're saying they don't know that he actually had one. So it's getting kind of weird out there. All right, getting on back to science and health. 75% of children who received vaccines in Mexican town now dead or hospitalized. This is a flashback story from last year. They were running a vaccine test. It was absolutely lethal. And let us not forget, back in 1976, remember the swine flu vaccine debacle? The vaccination killed 50 times as many people as the swine flu did, and they had to cancel the mandatory vaccine program. Now, apparently the FBI is investigating a computer virus which caused major outages at MedStar Health, where shooting victims of the Capitol were transported. Apparently some people got hurt in all the melee that was going on. Apparently the things were so bad they just had to shut the computers off. Now here's an interesting story. This is coming from the United States Geological Survey, reported in no less than the Washington Post. The USGS is now admitting there are 7 million Americans at risk of harm in man-made earthquakes due to fracking. And they're talking about actual damage, to experience damage or injury, not just to feel a little shake. 7 million Americans are at risk of suffering injury or damage from man-made earthquakes from fracking. Now, interesting little story. This came out of Russia today. U.S. scientists build a bacteria with smallest genome on Earth. They've created a truly alien form of life. And they've had 3 cycles of designing, building, and testing this genome to get the smallest genome, which produces a self-replicating synthetic living cell. It contains just 473 genes, and they still don't know what 1/3 of them do. So I hope they're keeping this thing in a BSL-4 containment, because it's self-replicating, it's artificial, it's not something that's evolved here, and they don't know what 1/3 of the genes do. Now, for those of you who still have huge amounts of Easter goodies, apparently dangerous levels of lead and cadmium have been found in popular brands of chocolate. We've toxified our entire food chain. I did a video not too long ago called What Are They Thinking? And it seems like so much of this has come to pass. We've had decades of a government that just looked the other way and let food and drug and chemical corporations just dump stuff wherever they want. And now we're seeing the result of it. They're finding toxic materials in our food, in our water, even in our processed food. I mean, lead poisoning causes permanent brain damage. And I think the American people need to get angry. It's like that movie Network, where the Peter Finch character gets up there and says, I'm mad as heck, and I'm not going to take it any longer. We need to be there. When we look at how we're being treated as livestock, just something to make more money off of. Sell processed, adulterated food with no nutrition and plenty of chemicals. Forced to buy medications that may not work and are actually harmful. When you're not allowed to decide what you're going to eat, what you're not going to eat, when you're not allowed to know what's in the food that's on the supermarket shelf or on the restaurant plate, when you're not allowed to decide for yourself what medications you're going to take or what medications you won't take, you're not free anymore. You're living in a dictatorship. If we have any inalienable rights at all, it is a right to decide what goes in our body and what does not. We don't want lead in our body. We don't want cadmium in our body. We don't want any heavy metals in our body. We don't want mercury in our bodies. And apparently they got a big problem. Got him. All right. You came into the wrong radio studio there, but all right. Where was I? Yeah, when you are not able to decide for yourself what goes into your body, you're not a free person anymore. You're somebody else's property. You're somebody else's livestock. And I think it's time for that to stop. We need to get angry. We have a right to healthy food and clean water. The Declaration of Independence assures us the inalienable rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, they threw that last one in there to cover up an inalienable right to property because the money junkies in 1776 didn't like that. But if we have an inalienable right to life, it must encompass within it an inalienable right to the essentials of life, which is healthy food, clean, safe water. And we're not getting it. We are not getting it at all. We're getting what the corporations find most profitable to sell to us or to force us to buy. We have descended into outright fascism. Now, at this point, I'm an old guy, and the damage is already done. But for those of you who are fortunate enough to be parents, you've got to be looking at your children right now and just wondering what damage is being done to them in the name of American commerce. Is autism from vaccines? Other unknowable, unknown harm from GMOs? Chemicals in the food? This is all being handled so recklessly. The government justifies its taxation of the people with the promise that they are going to stand on guard to make sure that we have safe, healthy food, safe, healthy medications. They don't. All of these agencies have become corrupted by the industries they're supposed to be monitoring. The United States is becoming toxic to human life itself. And I think it's very, very dangerous because it is spreading. We've got to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 877-300-7645, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, interesting little article over here in Sputnik News. U.S. may start lagging behind Russia and China in space exploration. And it says, currently, only two nations are capable of putting humans into space, and the United States is not one of them. And that's absolutely true. Russia can get astronauts into orbit, so can China. And the U.S. government doesn't seem concerned about it because their attention is totally focused on blowing up the countries that can get people into space and re-enslaving them to the U.S. dollar. Stephen Hawking is actually out there expressing his admiration that Russia has pulled ahead of America in the space race. And it does seem that the U.S. has been trying to rest on its laurels. I've been seeing this coming out of NASA, where they're always out there regurgitating the history of Apollo and the successes on Mars. But they're not really doing more than a token effort of moving forward with anything because they don't have the budget. Let's be honest. It's not up to NASA. The U.S. government thinks it's much more important to spend your money on bombs and bullets and drones and things like that. And we'll let those Russians and Chinese explore space. There's nothing value out there anyway. If there was, we would be there first. But NASA is a shell of its former self, and they keep trying to treat old discoveries as if they're new discoveries. And we're continuing to see how they'll come out with Curiosity has found XYZ, and it's a stunning new development, except that XYZ was already discovered by previous rovers and landers. NASA is almost completely dominated by the desire for generating positive press for itself, and they don't really have much to work with. Meanwhile, the ExoMars probe that Russia and Europe have put up to actually look for life on Mars has had some problems with its upper stage. It's currently on course, but apparently it's surrounded by some debris. Now, given orbital mechanics, the debris should continue to spread away from it and not be a problem. Meanwhile, Japan's new space telescope all of a sudden quit working, and ground observations are showing that it is in several pieces. Now, given that it was a telescope, I rather question whether it's an internal explosion or maybe it actually got hit by a meteor. It does seem like recently we've been seeing more meteors in the sky, and you need to understand that the Earth doesn't just lie flat in the middle of the plane of the Milky Way. It bobs up and down. And every 30,000 years, it passes through that center disk, which has got a lot more debris in it than above and below. And that will send a lot more material into Earth. And if you look at all the astroblems that have been dated on Earth, they tend to cluster around those 30,000-year intervals, and it's been about 30,000 years since the last time. We've been hearing about all these unexpected meteors and unexpected comets and everything, so it might be time to buy a hard hat. But yes, anything in orbit is vulnerable. It could have been space debris. There's a lot of stuff up there that simply cannot be tracked from the ground. May have even been debris from somebody's anti-satellite weapons test. Shows how short-sighted such testing is. We've talked about that before, how blowing up satellites in orbit just creates shrapnel that goes into other orbits and becomes a threat to other satellites. I think it would be worthwhile finding out what happened to that Japanese space telescope, and my heart goes out to all those flight controllers, because I know how hard it is to wait and develop and get your craft up there, and then all of a sudden it quits. That's very frustrating, and not just because of the losing of the job situation. People who work on spaceflight, they get very strongly attached to the mission, that sense of adventure. Now then, story coming out of Investment Watch blog, California is reporting that mercury levels are on the rise in California's rivers to the point where it is now becoming a threat to wildlife. It's another example of the mismanagement of this country, where the agencies will focus on something that's newsworthy and look the other way. And again, I'm looking back to that violinist, and I'm getting emails from people that agree this is a travesty. They're going to deport this world-class violinist back to Bulgaria at the same time they're declaring the illegal immigrants are effectively U.S. citizens. They say one thing and they're actually doing something else. Now, getting on back to the political campaigns, Andrea Mitchell is out there saying that Hillary Clinton is vulnerable when it comes to foreign policy. Hillary's been trying to ride her time as Secretary of State as a positive, but when you look at what was actually done while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, it quickly becomes a negative. She has almost nothing she can point to that was a foreign policy success. All of it fell apart. Benghazi, Libya, Yemen, Syria. Anybody who looks closely at Hillary Clinton's performance as Secretary of State, you are left with the unalterable conclusion that it was one botch-up after another, after another, after another. Because Hillary was setting foreign policy and Obama was setting foreign policy on the basis of a really good soundbite, and they didn't think it through. Another story coming out of Investment Watch blog, Hillary leads to more war. Her latest speech on Israel is just the newest horrific example because Hillary is out there saying, we have to stand by Israel. We have to destroy Israel's enemies for them. Israel is a nuclear power. They have hundreds of nuclear warheads. They can take care of themselves. They don't need us. Now, the U.S. still refuses to admit that Israel has nuclear weapons, because it makes every single penny of tax money, your tax money, sent to Israel, a crime by the U.S. government under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act. It is illegal for the U.S. government to send your tax money to any country in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel has nuclear weapons. They will not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the U.S. government gets around it by saying, well, we're not really sure. We've heard rumors, but we're not really sure. Let's grab ourselves a phone call here from Ron in the Bronx. Aloha, Ron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Great work on the Ted Cruz thing. It's like you and Rams are the only people that actually have something on it. But my question was about the Apollo program, as you were previously mentioning. Why do you think that China or Russia hasn't really put it out there that that was a whole, that thing was fake? I mean, I think it's fake.
Well, we have been over this time and time again. First of all, the remains of the Apollo landing sites have been imaged on the moon by satellites of other nations who aren't necessarily our friends, and they wouldn't go along with the hoax, okay? And so this is really a dead issue. The idea that the Apollo landings were faked is the same thing as chemtrails and HAARP and no plane at the Pentagon and the Umbrella Man at the John F. Kennedy motorcade. It is nonsense that the government puts out to try and make the independent media look kooky. Okay? Now, the Apollo landers all left an instrument at the landing sites called the Laser Ranging Retroreflector. And because it's nothing but a bunch of pyramids in a frame, prisms in a frame, you can still use it. Mythbusters bounced lasers off these LRR units. I did it too when I was at Table Mountain. Anybody with decent amateur telescope and laser and the necessary equipment can validate that those Apollo landing sites are still sending back those laser pulses. Okay, so thank you very much for the call. We're going to let you go. They are getting desperate out there to make us look silly. Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a break here. We're going to come back for our last segment of our program today, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program on this Monday. Donald Trump is out there saying that if he becomes president, he will consider stopping Saudi imports. And I'm sure the Saudis are not going to be happy about that. The Saudis have been part of the petrodollar deal since the 1970s. Up until recently, they kept their promise to sell their oil only for U.S. dollars and invest those dollars back in the United States of America. And the U.S. government buys a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia, even though we have ample oil supplies within our own borders. It's all part of the deal-making here. But Donald Trump is out there describing his foreign policy as America first. And that's something I absolutely agree with. America first, America second, America third, everybody else back of the bus. And, of course, he's being excoriated for it. Oh, he's an isolationist. We can't have this. It's America's role to dominate the world and lead it into the New World Order. But, you know, it's interesting. Donald Trump's idea isn't new and radical. back in 1941 in Des Moines, Charles Lindbergh, first man to fly solo across the Atlantic and later a politician, came on out saying exactly the same thing. The business of the United States government is the United States. Not Israel, not Great Britain, not France, not Germany. All of the conflict that we have seen over these last 13 years comes from Washington, D.C., thinking it's their business to stick their nose into other people's countries and twist them around to serve U.S. corporate interests. Now, there's an article over in RINF.com talking about a new poll, and this is very, very telling. The majority of Americans say the election process is broken. But a majority of them also think there is one candidate remaining in the current 5 who is qualified to be President of the United States of America. They don't actually go on out and say who that is really, but there's kind of a weird thing you all need to keep in mind. There are now 5 people left in the race for president. 4 of them live off the government. And those 4 are all ganged up complaining to you and me about the one guy that doesn't. So you might want to keep that in mind. They want to keep their little government clique intact and going. Now, the anonymous group has launched their own investigation into the Arizona election fraud. And they're finding things beyond the mere fact that ballots were missing, polling places were closed down. Apparently, they have documented cases where Bernie Sanders supporters were prevented from voting because they were mysteriously changed from Democratic to Independent. And Anonymous have issued a press release saying that the abnormally low vote total appears to be the result of the Clinton campaign hacking the Sanders campaign voter database. Because a lot of those Sanders voters showed up, and their votes weren't being counted because they were listed as independent, not as Democrat. This is the crookedest election in U.S. history. Now, you remember the torture scandal? And the CIA is still trying to keep the report away from you. And they've been coming out with all these photos about naked photos of detainees, and they're all tied up, and they're showing them around saying, see, we didn't do anything to these guys. It has now come out from The Guardian that the CIA took all these naked photographs of bound prisoners before the torture began, just to have on hand so that they could send to other governments to say, see, we're not torturing these people. It's another fraud. It's another cover-up. Now, we know from a gentleman named Binyam Mohammed that far worse things than waterboarding were done to these people to try and get one of them to say, yes, Saddam has nuclear weapons, here they are. Because intelligence experts, experienced career intelligence people will tell you, torture does not get you useful intelligence. The person being tortured is going to scream whatever he thinks the torturer wants to hear to make the pain stop. What torture does get you is a politically expedient confession. Like when they tortured Rudolf Hess into his confession at the Nuremberg trials. That's what torture is used for. See, the guy confessed. We were right. Saddam had a Death Star. There's a very alarming story, again, out of Investment Watch blog. Actually, no, it came over from Liberty, came up from another website. It doesn't really matter. Here's the headline. Obama, separation of powers, very frustrating sometimes for president, like herding cats. President Obama said last Wednesday it was very frustrating for the president to have this separation of powers. Do you see where his thinking is going? He's thinking the same thing that George W. Bush was thinking when Bush joked about how easy this country would be if it was a dictatorship, so long as Bush was the dictator. That's how they're thinking. They're already tearing apart the Bill of Rights. Now they want to tear apart all the checks and balances. They want a single totalitarian ruler, and then they're all going to fight with each other to be that totalitarian ruler. Until one of them says, you know, that monarchy we just reestablished in Libya, that sounds like a good idea. We're going to have that here. It's amazing. Now, Israel had appointed a new ambassador to Brazil, Dani Dayan. And apparently Brazil was very upset because this Dani Dayan is a settler extremist and is a leader in the Jewish settlements attacks on the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. And Brazil said, we don't want this guy. And Israel finally backed down, said, all right, Brazil doesn't want him. And they reassigned him to the United States because the U.S. government doesn't really care about that kind of thing. Now, over in Israel, Gush Shalom, probably you've heard about them. They do a lot of good work. They've just launched a comprehensive database providing information for consumers on the location, activities, and the evasive tactics used by businesses located in the illegally occupied Palestinian territories. I'm expecting the Israeli government to try and find some way to shut this down or block it. But for those of you who are refusing to buy products made in these illegal settlements, this is a tremendous resource for you to be using. Okay, apparently, this is a good one. Apparently, U.S. law enforcement disrupted what they call the cocaine subs. You've been hearing about these? They're not real true submarines. They're just mostly underwater, and only a little tiny bit of it is above water to evade radar. And they were trying to seize this cocaine sub with about $200 million worth of cocaine, and apparently they lost it, and it sank to the ocean floor. There's going to be a lot of very happy fish around there, I think. It is now turning out there was, in fact, an active shooter drill scheduled at Capitol Hill at the exact same time the active shooter showed up. And again, according to that earlier story, the cops shot this guy, and apparently some other people bystander. They don't know that he actually had a gun. They may have just thought he was part of the drill, and it just got out of control. Now, the Alliance for Lobbying, Transparency, and Ethics Regulation has been petitioning the British government on secret European Union meetings with industry lobbyists, and the British government is saying, no, it is none of your business. What the lobbyists are doing with the organs of government, that's personal, private business. You don't need to know what the lobbyists are asking from the government. That's none of your business. Which is how we got into this vaccine mandated situation. You're not allowed to know if your food has GMO. Here in the United States, ever since Citizens United, the government has been for sale to the highest bidder. And unfortunately, you, the American people, don't have the finances to compete with the giant corporations. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard Show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, share what you know with who you know. If you can, make a donation to WhatReallyHappened.com, and Aloha America.